And I would like to announce the first speaker. It's Professor Dirk Lindebaum from Cardiff Business School, and he's going to talk about the use of anger at work. Over to you, Dirk.
Thank you, Marco, very much. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for the whole World Wide Web. We have millions of visitors, viewers online. But yeah, a genuine welcome from me. I like to talk about anger in the workplace a little bit. And what I try to do today in this informal setting is to highlight a few misconceptions about anger in the workplace and how it affects actually how we deal with each other in the context of work. So don't be afraid. In order to explain that and illustrate it a bit further, I've brought a little friend of mine. Right. So, and why did I bring him? And why is Hulk smash relevant? So you can see it in the first movie, the quote, "Don't make me angry. You won't like it if I'm angry." Would you go for a date with him? No, probably not. He looks very, very angry, but even though he's angry, it does something to us, and it instills the idea that we need to be fearful. And this is one problem that I think we face in today's society, that the mere expression of anger in the workplace is perceived as if there is a real threat. It is so visceral, as if there is a real threat behind it. And then the conclusion is that, well, we have to do something about it. If we just spin it a bit further, and imagine I would have stormed into the room and said, "Where is that idiot that took my parking space? Can't you read it's reserved for me?" I would be immediately lowered in the public perception. This guy has an anger management problem. And while I'm not denying that there are destructive consequences of using anger or being angry in the workplace, I want to problematize that a little bit. So anger is often viewed as a negative emotion. And that's a point that I want to take issue with a little bit. And particularly if it comes to the point that not only is anger a negative emotion, but it's equated with a verbal abuse. And once it comes to verbal abuse, then we have this, right? So this is actually from a bin collection truck in Manchester. And it says zero tolerance, crew abuse will not be tolerated. Now, of course, nobody should be subjected to abuse in the workplace, but the point is that there are some forms of anger that are actually quite important to appreciate. And if we lump together all kinds of anger, or if we equate verbal abuse with anger, we lose out on an important function of anger in the workplace and in society overall. And it is that I want to perhaps briefly highlight here tonight. So if I ask you the question, and again I underline two strokes, I'm not denying the destructive potential of anger. Nobody should be subject to an angry line manager, abusive supervision, etc., etc. But there is a form of anger that's actually quite useful. So I'd like to put a question to you. Simple question. So imagine a world without anger. So you're free to chip in now, interact. It's an informal setting here. Imagine a world without anger. Think about it. Tick. So any scenarios that pop to mind, that pop into your head? A world without anger.
Like the Care Bears?
Say again, please.
Like the Care Bears?
You're referring to an example I can't relate to.
Because I remember these little bears, cartoon bears.
No, my kids are 4 and 7 now. They don't watch it anymore. Now, okay, I don't want to stretch you too much here. The point that I want to make is that there's a form of anger which we have referred to previously as moral anger. And moral anger, and the word moral implies a concern for others. So, under that formulation, anger has an important function, that is to redress injustice. The function and consequence of anger is to redress injustice. If you imagine a world without anger, then it is likely that acts of injustice, unfairness, etc., are likely to prevail. It would disempower some part of the population and mean that others are better off. So that is the idea. In the precise context of work, and I'm actually glad that we have somebody from the NHS tonight here in the audience. We have actually, when we looked at the NHS documentation, and we could see that verbal abuse is applied in a very 5 minutes, I'm almost through. It's applied in a very loose way, and it allows the potential that anger expression is equated with verbal abuse. The power rests with the perceiving eye, and it's in the eye of the beholder. So if the doctor has messed up something very significant in communicating the test results, and I get angry because it was a decision between life and death, theoretically, the person has then the authority to call in whatever police, security guards, and the appropriate protocol will be called upon. We actually had it with the youngest son on one occasion. So the problem is that there are rules there to protect people from verbal abuse, and that's important in a way. But there is a danger that only because I don't like what you tell me now, I invoke the notion you've been abusing me. The interesting thing in the context of the NHS is actually that long waiting times are often cited as causes for patient or relative misbehavior. But if you actually care for somebody who is in a very critical condition, well, the question for me is, how long can you stay calm? So to apply that notion specifically to the context of work, we have argued in a paper recently that that kind of anger can serve as a tool of diagnosis. It offers valuable cues about the stress points in particular organizations, and it can actually help, if people want to repair flawed organizational practices and processes that carry a lot of risk and harm for some people, especially when the underlying notion is a violation of moral concerns. Morality implying a concern for others, and you step actually in to do something about it. Even though, as we have argued in the paper, that entails a degree of risk for the individual who actually speaks up. Yeah? So, what does it mean for management practice? We have suggested that rather than responding to an angry outburst as, oh no, you've been verbally abusing me, sometimes it's useful to step back and think, now why on earth did that person get angry with me or somebody else? Why did that person get angry with me or somebody else? So I'm invoking the words of my colleague from Temple University, and I think she's actually looking at me now. She used the lovely phrase, message in the madness. Try to decipher what is the message in the madness, madness being the anger expression. And once you get to that point, you may learn a valuable lesson. And since I'm so generously endowed with remaining time, I can actually give you an example. So there was one study that showed that they looked at the anger expressions by a leader and how followers' performance is affected by that. And that study found that if the follower had the motivation to understand why the leader got angry with him or her, that follower performed better. In the absence of a desire to understand why the leader got angry, performance was comparatively worse. So anger is not necessarily a negative thing. I'm struggling with the notion negative emotion in the first place. There are uses and functions to specific emotions, and I think it's important to be aware of them. The therapeutic value of that, once you understand that and apply it to yourself, is infinite, is vast, right? Good, so a conclusion to finish, hopefully bang on time. So in an essay with my colleague from Bath, Yanis Gabriel, we have concluded that we have suggested rather that a world without anger would be a compliant world, but it would unlikely be a just world. And on that note, considerably ahead of time, I don't know, I like to draw that to actually I've overrun by 26 seconds.
Thank you.
Anyhow, thank you so much for your attention. if you allow me 5 more seconds, if you are interested in this kind of research, please feel free to visit my website, dirklindebaum.eu. EU capital letters. Thank you very much.
Questions and or comments for Dirk? Yes, please.
How do you think, you used the term like anger
Yeah.
in terms of the way people express that feeling as
Yeah.
well as the way people experience it.
Yeah.
Do you think, because I would argue that anger is a useful emotion, but it's
Yeah.
not necessarily a useful expression, whereas like assertiveness, like you can be angry, but you can express
Yeah.
yourself.
Spot on
quite
comment.
without being aggressive.
Spot on comment. What we can do is 2 things. We can regulate the experience of the emotion, and we can regulate the expression of the emotion. Now, you can't try to deny the existence of anger in the first place, so you don't even experience it. Well, I think then we have a problem, because there's no corrective energy then. There are ways to express anger in constructive ways. You can say, for instance, well, actually, no. Because if in the context of university, if we are angry, you don't say, I'm angry. Because you would say, oh, I'm rather unhappy about it. But it's useful to be aware that there's an energy, and you can use it in productive ways. It doesn't mean you have to bang your fists on the table, but it's an appreciation, the energy is there, and you act on it in constructive ways. So we can regulate that. I think the problem begins when it becomes high destructive, because you can't regulate it. Yeah? But spot on comment, thank you.
Yes, please. Robin.
I've got a question that sort of relates to the Hulk behind you. And that's what you were saying about how we should, or the manager, the example you gave, should challenge, should channel the anger and question why somebody is expressing this anger. But I suppose the decision to decide whether a piece of anger is legitimate or not is still vested with the manager. So you might say, oh, that
Yeah.
person's having a Hulk moment, or that
Yeah.
person's got a genuine grievance
Yeah.
over the
Yeah.
fact that their family is queuing for it.
Anger is a high status emotion. So you're right, absolutely right. There is an issue of status. But the fact that we are in a lower status, it doesn't mean that we don't experience anger. And the problem is when you start suppressing emotion, then you end up in a very bad shape, psychologically and physiologically. And you also, by suppressing emotion, you actually inhibit relationship formation with colleagues. Yeah.
But then you're in that situation where, as the subordinate person, you've got some sort of legitimate channel now to express anger, but it's still up to the manager to determine whether your anger is a legitimate expression or you're just being an awkward bugger.
It's true. But I think you can also try. Okay, so appreciate. Okay, this is we have a kind of a hierarchical relationship here. Do I have to act it out? Well, not necessarily. I can actually try to read the message, the madness in the message, and thereby gain valuable information to identify organizational fault lines. I can just as well think, oh, you're just a bloody subordinate. Why should I listen to you? Just as well, but you miss an opportunity to learn. It's in the individual's choice as to whether the person pursues A or B. Yeah?
David.
Have you looked at this in different cultural contexts? Maybe I'm being too stereotypical here, but my experience, I think, is written about it, depending where you are, which country, what type of people, different things are acceptable. So here, as you said, I think is that more of a British thing? Where
I learned the hard way. I learned the hard way. You see, my wife is from Greece, and I think that explains very well that and I'm German, right? So we have very vivid conversations at home, and there's cultural variation. We can go into minute detail about whether it's biological processes or more cultural learning perspectives that applies. You will see that cultures mediate. That culture mediates the experience and expression of anger. Yeah? They call it, if you ever want to impress somebody at the pub, it's the word emotionologies. Emotionologies. It refers to the attitude of society towards the expression of basic emotion. So it has a chronological dimension and a cultural dimension. So between countries, but also over time. What once was appropriate to display in America, anger in political debates, well, now we have it actually a lot. But you know, there are periods where one emotion is more tolerated in its expression in the public space than others. So these things apply. You're right. Yes.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.